If we want to understand anatomy and physiology, we have to understand developmental biology to a certain degree. Now, depending on how far and how deep you want to go into anatomy and physiology, will really dictate how much you need to understand of developmental biology. But we need to understand a little bit just to be able to understand some of the basics of anatomy and physiology. Mainly, we need to understand where cells and tissues come from in a developmental stance because some of them are derived from similar areas, right? So, like all of your muscle tissue is derived from these similar tissues during development. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But the thing to remember is that you eventually start off as just a single cell, a diploid cell, combination of sperm and egg. And that cell is going to divide, and then those cells divide, and they divide even more. And then eventually, what happens is they are going to form a hollow ball of cells known as a blastula. So you are at one point, you were just a hollow ball of cells, a blastula, and this center opening is known as the blastocele. Now, throughout time, as you continue to develop as a little growing embryo and fetus, right? What's going to happen is that there's going to be an invagination of cells in this blastula, right? And where that invagination happens, that's going to be called the blastopore. And cells invaginate in. And this forms two different layers of cells. We form what's called the ectoderm out here, and we form what's called the endoderm, the inside. Now, eventually, what's going to happen is that these cells that are invaginating inwards are going to continue to migrate until they reach the other side and basically poke a hole all the way through the other side. So you basically got a tube that runs through the center, and that tube will eventually differentiate into your GI tract, your digestive system, right? And so that process is gastrulation. That is the invagination and the start of the development of your GI tract. Now, when you develop as a vertebrate, you are a deuterostome, which means deutero, second, stoma, mouth. It means your mouth forms second, right? So when this invaginates in, this becomes the other end of the digestive tract, the anus. So this is the anus, and then as it comes all the way through, then it forms the mouth second, deuterostome. So I like to tell students at one point in time, you were nothing but a ball of cells and an asshole, right? Because that's what forms first, is the anus. Now, during this process, cells here at sort of this ridge where this blastophore is going to form sort of pinch off and migrate off into the center here of this blastocele, basically in the middle of that open hollow area. And those cells form what we call the third germ layer. That's going to be the middle layer. And so we have an outer layer, a middle layer, and an inner layer, what we refer to as the ectoderm, outer layer, endoderm, inner layer, and then mesoderm, middle layer. So your ectoderm is going to divide into cells that become the outside, your skin, as well as the nervous system. We'll talk about that in just a second. The mesoderm is going to become cells of the urinary system, the blood, as well as all of the different types of muscle. So all muscle, whether that be cardiac, skeletal, or smooth muscle, all comes from mesoderm. And then your endoderm is going to be the GI tract and then portions of the lung and the respiratory system as well. Now, once you form this gastrula, right, and it goes all the way through, and you have that tube that goes all the way through, you have the development of your three layers. You basically have your ectoderm, your mesoderm, and then your endoderm would be down here, right? So imagine this goes all the way around, right? Your ectoderm goes sort of all the way around. Portion of that ectoderm is going to start to invaginate even more in a different spot, right? And it's going to form what we call the neural groove, right? It forms a groove along the sort of outside of this gastrula. Once this happens, this process starts a bigger developmental process known as neurulation. And what's going to happen is that it's going to continue to invaginate, and eventually these cells of the neural crest will sort of come over and they will sort of wrap around and then pinch off, right? And so what happens is you get the development of this tube that then pinches off. and that's the neurotube. And that's what's going to form into the notochord, which will then eventually differentiate into your spinal cord and then your brain during the process of cephalization, enlargement of portion of that neural tube. So this process here is known as neurulation, and all of the nervous system is derived from that neural plate, which was initially ectoderm. So it's important to understand that developmental process, at least just a little bit, so that we understand where these cells come from a developmental standpoint. If we want to talk about stem cells, this is where the stem cells come from because eventually, or at one point in your life, you were nothing but a hollow ball of cells, and these cells here were undifferentiated neurons. They weren't specialized neurons to become one specific neuron of a specific nerve. Right? We can understand that. We can manipulate that in certain ways. Then we can have the discussion about ethics later, right? We can start to fix problems with the nervous system because now we can turn things on, turn things off, or potentially just form new cells from a developmental standpoint. But if we don't understand where these cells come from, we don't have that opportunity.